The evening air was thick with the scent of lavender from the candles flickering in the dimly lit living room. I sat on the plush, velvet sofa, my daughter, Emily, opposite me, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her face a mask of unease. On the coffee table between us lay the dress, an exquisite, floor-length gown made of shimmering silver fabric that pooled elegantly at the hem. It was a gift from her cousin, Regina, a girl of impeccable taste, but a heart wrapped in cold steel. Emily had received it earlier that day, a lavish present to mark her 8th birthday. But when she opened the box, instead of excitement, her expression darkened. She let the dress slip from her fingers as though it had burned her. "I can't wear it, Mom," she had said, her voice flat. I was baffled. "Why not? It's beautiful, Emily. Regina's father must have spent a fortune on this." She shook her head vehemently. "You'll understand if you put it on." Her words gnawed at me for the rest of the evening. I tried asking again, but she only offered a hollow stare, retreating upstairs with a firm slam of her bedroom door. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of the wooden floors as I paced, staring at the dress. Curiosity won. I reached out and lifted the gown, running my fingers over the silky material. It was undeniably beautiful, a designer piece with delicate embroidery that shimmered under the dim light. Still, something about Emily's reaction made my stomach churn. But how could I understand unless I experienced it myself? Taking a deep breath, I carried the dress upstairs to my room. The full-length mirror reflected my hesitant movements as I slipped it on. The fabric was cool against my skin, fitting me almost perfectly, except for a slight tightness around my ribs. Strange. Then, as I turned, a sudden pressure gripped my chest. A sharp, constricting force wrapped around me, growing tighter by the second. Panic surged through me as I clawed at the bodice, struggling to breathe. My reflection showed nothing unusual, but the sensation was undeniable. It felt like unseen hands were pressing against my ribs, squeezing the air from my lungs. I gasped, stumbling backward, my fingers fumbling with the hidden clasps at the back. My vision blurred at the edges, my breath shallow and rapid. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. With a final desperate tug, the dress came loose. I collapsed onto the floor, heaving in lungfuls of air. My heart pounded violently against my ribs as I sat there, trembling. Then I noticed something odd about the inner lining of the dress. My fingers, still shaking, peeled back the delicate fabric, revealing tiny thread-like wires embedded within. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had modified this dress, not just altered, it was designed to tighten, to suffocate. A death trap. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, my mind racing through every chilling possibility. Emily's mom kept asking herself why. And most horrifying of all, had Regina known? I didn't wait to find out. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911. As the ringing tone echoed in my ear, I kept my eyes fixed on the gown sprawled on the floor, shimmering innocently in the moonlight. A deadly gift, carefully wrapped in luxury. Emily had known, and now, so did I. The call connected. 911, what's your emergency? I opened my mouth to speak, but a sudden rustling sound made me freeze. It wasn't coming from the phone, it was in the room. My gaze darted back to the dress. The silver fabric quivered slightly, as if it were still alive, reacting to my fear. I need to report an attempted... My breath hitched as I forced the words out. An attempted attack. A dress. It was designed to suffocate me. The dispatcher hesitated, clearly not expecting such a bizarre claim. "Ma'am, could you clarify? Are you in immediate danger?" I licked my dry lips. Not anymore, but someone tried to kill my daughter, and now me. I need officers here immediately. As soon as I ended the call, I grabbed a pair of scissors from my nightstand. My hands were still trembling as I carefully sliced through the inner lining of the dress, peeling it open layer by layer. The tiny wires I had seen earlier were more than just threads. They were interwoven through the entire bodice like a tightening web. Embedded within the fabric were small, barely noticeable mechanisms, almost like sensors. Emily had known. But how? A sudden thought struck me. I needed to talk to her. Now. I bolted from my room and pounded on her door. "Emily?" My voice came out more frantic than I intended. A few seconds passed before the door creaked open. Emily stood there, her eyes red-rimmed, her expression weary but unsurprised. "You put it on," she murmured. "It wasn't a question." I nodded, unable to form words. She sighed and stepped aside, letting me in. The dim glow of her bedside lamp cast shadows on the walls, the scent of lavender still lingering in the air. She sat on the edge of her bed, wrapping her arms around herself as if warding off a chill. I didn't know for sure, she admitted, staring at the floor. Not until I touched it. Something felt wrong. She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. But I knew Regina wouldn't just give me a dress. Not without a reason. I frowned. Emily, what are you saying? You think she meant for this to happen? Her silence was answer enough. But why? I pressed. Why would she want to hurt you? Emily inhaled sharply, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Because, Mom, she looked at me with haunted eyes. I know something she doesn't want anyone else to find out. I felt the blood drain from my face. What do you mean? Emily opened her nightstand drawer and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She handed it to me with a shaky hand. Before you read that, she said, her voice tight, just know that whatever happens next, we can't trust her. Emily's mom kept asking herself why. And most horrifying of all, had Regina known? I didn't wait to find out. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911. As the ringing tone echoed in my ear, I kept my eyes fixed on the gown sprawled on the floor, shimmering innocently in the moonlight, a deadly gift, carefully wrapped in luxury. Emily had known, and now so did I. The call connected. 911, what's your emergency? I opened my mouth to speak, but a sudden rustling sound made me freeze. It wasn't coming from the phone, it was in the room. My gaze darted back to the dress. The silver fabric quivered slightly, as if it were still alive, reacting to my fear. I need to report an attempted... My breath hitched as I forced the words out. An attempted attack. A dress. It was designed to suffocate me. The dispatcher hesitated, clearly not expecting such a bizarre claim. Ma'am, could you clarify? Are you in immediate danger? I licked my dry lips. Not anymore, but someone tried to kill my daughter, and now me. I need officers here immediately. As soon as I ended the call, I grabbed a pair of scissors from my nightstand. My hands were still trembling as I carefully sliced through the inner lining of the dress, peeling it open layer by layer. The tiny wires I had seen earlier were more than just threads. They were interwoven through the entire bodice like a tightening web. Embedded within the fabric were small, barely noticeable mechanisms, almost like sensors. Emily had known. But how? A sudden thought struck me. I needed to talk to her. Now. I bolted from my room and pounded on her door. Emily? My voice came out more frantic than I intended. A few seconds passed before the door creaked open. Emily stood there, her eyes red-rimmed, her expression weary but unsurprised. You put it on, she murmured. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to form words. She sighed and stepped aside, letting me in. The dim glow of her bedside lamp cast shadows on the walls, the scent of lavender still lingering in the air. She sat on the edge of her bed, wrapping her arms around herself as if warding off a chill. I didn't know for sure, she admitted, staring at the floor. Not until I touched it. Something felt wrong. She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. But I knew Regina wouldn't just give me a dress. Not without a reason. I frowned. Emily, what are you saying? You think she meant for this to happen? Her silence was answer enough. But why? I pressed. Why would she want to hurt you? Emily inhaled sharply, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Because, Mom, she looked at me with haunted eyes. I know something she doesn't want anyone else to find out. I felt the blood drain from my face. What do you mean? Emily opened her nightstand drawer and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She handed it to me with a shaky hand. Before you read that, she said, her voice tight, just know that whatever happens next, we can't trust her. We never could. I unfolded the paper and began to read. The words inside changed everything. I could hardly breathe as I read the words on the paper. Each letter seemed to burn into my memory, deepening the sense of unease that had already settled within me. The journal entry was a confession, a horrifying truth about a family that had hidden its dark side behind layers of false smiles and warm greetings. Dad killed Uncle George. It was poison. It had to be. He said it was the only way to stop the plan, to make sure Emily never got to benefit from what Dad left her. The words were scrawled hastily, the handwriting frantic, but clear enough to understand. Regina had written it all down, every detail about the poison her father had slipped into her uncle's drink. The same uncle, Emily's father, who had promised to take care of everything for her when she turned 18. I stared at the paper in disbelief. Regina saw it. Emily whispered, her voice trembling. She saw her father poison mine. I didn't know she knew, but she did. I felt my heart race as I processed what Emily had just said. The whole family was caught in a web of lies, betrayal, and deadly secrets. Regina's father, Emily's uncle, had killed his own brother, her father, to ensure that Emily would never inherit the wealth or the security he had planned for her. The very plans that had been his legacy. The reason Emily's father had worked so hard, the reason he had invested everything in securing her future, had been destroyed by a man who wanted to keep it all for himself. But it didn't end there. Regina, knowing the terrible secret, had somehow believed that Emily might be a threat to her family. And so, to prevent Emily from ever speaking the truth, she and her dad had designed the dress, a deadly trap to silence her forever. I looked up at Emily, feeling a cold chill crawl down my spine. "I overheard them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I overheard him, her father. He was in their garage, talking to her about the dress, assuring her that the wires would work and it would kill me." I clenched the paper in my hand, my thoughts racing. The dress wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was the result of a carefully orchestrated plan to end Emily's life. And Regina, despite her shock and guilt, had done nothing to stop it. She had allowed her father's plan to unfold, maybe even encouraged it. "Regina is scared," Emily said, her face pale. "She knows if I talk, if anyone finds out, it's over, but she didn't count on me hearing that conversation." I took a step back, my mind spinning. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the poison, the hidden agenda, felt suffocating. How had it all gone so wrong? How had a once loving family become so fractured, so consumed by greed and fear? I looked at Emily, my heart aching for the girl I had raised, the girl who had lost everything. "She's not going to stop," I said firmly. "Regina's father won't stop. We have to act fast, Emily, before it's too late." Emily nodded, her face hardening with determination. "We need to expose them, Mom. We need to make sure the truth comes out, no matter the cost." But even as I said it, I knew that the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. Regina's father was dangerous, and if he knew I had read the journal, if he knew we had uncovered his secret, there would be no stopping him. "I'll call the police," I said, already dialing 911 again. But this time, I knew I had to be careful. Regina's father was a master of deception. No one would believe us if we didn't have the right evidence. As the phone rang, I glanced at Emily, her eyes full of resolve. It's time to end this. For good. But even as I said it, I wondered if it would be enough. Would the police believe us? Would they take us seriously when the truth was so tangled in lies and betrayal? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. This was no longer just about a dress. It was about survival. The police had arrived by morning, but by then, the sense of urgency had morphed into a chilling sense of doubt. I couldn't shake the feeling that Regina's father, the man behind this twisted plot, had already covered his tracks. Emily and I had spent the night rehearsing our story, trying to gather enough evidence to back up the accusations, but the more we talked, the more I feared the truth wouldn't be enough. The officers were polite, professional, but there was a noticeable skepticism in their eyes. The first thing they asked for was the dress, the so-called death trap. Emily and I brought it to them in a large garment bag, the metallic threads of the gown still faintly shimmering, its appearance far too innocent to be the source of such horror. I could tell they weren't convinced. The fabric was beautiful, luxurious, but the tiny wires embedded within the dress, hidden beneath the layers, didn't make any immediate sense. It would take more than just our words to prove that this gown had been intentionally designed to kill. "We'll have this sent to forensics," the lead officer, Detective Harris, said, holding the dress up to the light as if expecting something more obvious to appear. "But for now, we need to focus on what you overheard, Emily. You say you heard Mr. Richmond, Regina's father, talking about the dress?" Emily nodded, her expression tense. "Yes, it was a couple of nights ago when I went to their house to look for my pet. I didn't think anyone would be there, but I heard them talking in the garage. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but when I heard him assured Regina that it would kill me, I froze." Detective Harris nodded, writing something down in his notebook. Do you remember exactly what was said? Any specific details that might help? I exchanged a glance with Emily. She had always been good at remembering things, but this was no ordinary conversation. How could we make them understand the gravity of what she had overheard? I remember him asking if the wires would cut off the air supply. He said something about making sure the dress would tighten enough, like a trap, and that no one would be able to trace it back to them. Emily's voice cracked as she spoke. I didn't know how to react. I wanted to tell someone, but I didn't want to put us in danger. The detective looked up, his face unreadable. That's serious, but we need more than just overheard words. Where's the journal? The one Regina wrote in about her father's confession. I froze. The journal. The one Regina had kept hidden, where she had written about the poison, about her father's crime. The one Emily had torn a page from and handed to me. It was tucked away in a drawer in my bedroom, but I hadn't thought to bring it out when the officers arrived. I started, feeling the weight of the moment. It's upstairs. I'll go get it. I rushed upstairs, my mind racing. I had never imagined a day like this would come. What if the journal was the key to proving everything? What if it turned out to be the one thing that would link Regina's father to the murder of Emily's father? As I reached the drawer and pulled out the journal, my hands were shaking. The page Emily had torn from it was still inside, the ink smudged slightly from where it had been hastily ripped free. I looked down at the scrawled words, but something caught my eye. It was a second journal entry, one I had missed. I don't want to do this anymore. I can't watch him slowly die. I'm scared. What if Emily finds out? She'll ruin everything. I'll never forgive myself. He doesn't deserve this, but I have to protect my father. This has gone too far. I sucked in a breath. Regina had written that. It wasn't just an admission of guilt. It was a confession. She had been complicit, terrified of what would happen if Emily learned the truth. But it was clear now. She hadn't just been a bystander. She was an active part of the plan. She had tried to silence Emily for fear that her father's crime would be exposed. I hurried downstairs with the journal in hand. Detective Harris took it from me immediately, his eyes scanning the entry. This changes things, he muttered. This could be the evidence we need. I could see the shift in his demeanor. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a cold determination. We'll need to bring Regina in for questioning, he said, his voice steady, and we'll have to investigate her father thoroughly. If what you're telling me is true, this goes much deeper than just a failed attempt on Emily's life. It's about murder, betrayal, and a cover-up. But as he spoke, a new wave of panic hit me. What if Regina's father was already planning his next move? What if he knew we were getting too close to the truth? I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The days that followed felt like a blur, a chaotic whirlwind of fear, suspicion, and the hope that we could stop whatever Regina's father had planned next. Emily and I barely slept, our thoughts consumed by the terrifying knowledge that the man who had killed her father, who had orchestrated this entire nightmare, was still out there, possibly watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Detective Harris kept us updated, but his news wasn't reassuring. The forensic team had confirmed the wires in the dress were designed to tighten, potentially cutting off the air supply. They had also found traces of a substance in the fabric that could be linked to certain toxins, though they needed more time to confirm it. But for now, they were focusing on gathering concrete evidence against Regina's father. He was the one who had poisoned Emily's father, the one who had orchestrated this entire scheme. But would they find enough evidence to make an arrest before he could cover his tracks? Or worse, before he made another move? The tension between Regina and Emily escalated. Emily had tried to reach out to her, hoping to understand her role in all of this, hoping that Regina would confess, but every attempt was met with cold indifference. It seemed like Regina knew what was coming, and she wasn't willing to face the consequences. And then came the phone call that changed everything. It was late one evening, and Emily and I were sitting in the living room watching the muted television when my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked, but something about the call felt wrong from the start. "Hello?" I answered, my voice tight with anticipation. "Hello, Mrs. Harper. a cold voice responded, and my heart sank. It was Regina's father. Mr. Richmond, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What do you want? Emily, of course, he replied smoothly, as though the whole situation was nothing but a casual conversation. You didn't think you'd get away with this, did you? You and your little friend, Detective Harris. It's all too late now. The words hit me like a slap. How did he know about the police investigation? Was he watching us? What have you done? I demanded, barely able to contain my fear. Where's Regina? She's fine, he said, his voice dripping with smugness. But not for long. I've made sure of that. And as for Emily, well, you can't protect her forever. She's a threat to me, and that threat ends tonight. Before I could respond, the line went dead. My heart raced, and my mind spun with terror. He was planning something worse than before. I turned to Emily, who had overheard the conversation. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She had already been through so much, but the idea of Regina's father having a hand in her father's death and now possibly planning something for her was too much to bear. We need to leave, I said quickly, rushing to grab my coat. We can't stay here any longer. We need to go to the police. But as we reached the front door, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. A car had pulled up outside. My stomach churned. It wasn't the police. I peeked through the window and saw a figure get out of the car, cloaked in the darkness. It was Regina's father. We had no choice now. We had to act fast. Emily, go upstairs and lock yourself in the bathroom. Don't come out unless you hear me knock, understood? Emily nodded quickly, her eyes filled with terror. She didn't hesitate, running up the stairs and disappearing into the bathroom. I grabbed the phone, quickly dialing Detective Harris. Detective, he's here. Mr. Richmond, he's outside, I whispered urgently, trying to keep my voice steady. We need help now before he does something drastic. We're on our way, Harris replied, his voice tense. Stay where you are. Don't engage him. But as I hung up, I knew we couldn't wait any longer. I had to protect Emily. And there was no way Regina's father would leave without doing something more to ensure that his secrets stayed buried. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy vase, and moved toward the door. There was a soft knock at the front door, followed by the unmistakable voice of Mr. Richmond. Let me in, Mrs. Harper, he called, his voice smooth and mocking. I've come for what's mine. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of the police, but nothing came, only the steady, unnerving silence of the night. Then suddenly, the door was kicked open with a force that sent the vase crashing to the floor. Mr. Richmond stood in the doorway, his cold, calculating eyes fixed on me. You really thought you could stop me, didn't you? He sneered. You're too late. Before I could respond, I heard the distant sound of sirens growing louder. Not too late, Mr. Richmond, I said, feeling a rush of hope. You're not going to get away with this. He glanced at me, his face hardening, and I knew then that the final confrontation had begun. It was a race against time, and I had no idea who would come out on top. Emily, myself, or the man who had orchestrated so much death and destruction. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let him take her. Not without a fight. The sirens grew louder, but Mr. Richmond didn't flinch. He just stood there, a cruel smile creeping across his face, as though he had all the time in the world. I could see the tension in his eyes. He knew the police were close, but he didn't seem worried. It was as if this final act was part of a twisted game he'd been playing for far too long. Don't think you're going to win this time, he said, his voice low and venomous. You're just a pawn in this, and Emily, well, Emily's my final piece. I swallowed, trying to steady my breathing. The vase lay shattered at my feet, a symbol of everything that had been torn apart in our lives over the past few weeks. Emily had suffered, and now she was hidden upstairs, out of his reach, for now. I backed away, keeping my eyes on him, my mind racing. I had no weapon, no plan other than to protect Emily. But I knew one thing for sure. If I didn't stop him now, there might not be a tomorrow for either of us. Just then, a sound, footsteps, echoed from the hallway behind me. Detective Harris and his team had arrived. I didn't wait for their backup. I lunged forward, desperate to make sure that Mr. Richmond didn't have a chance to escape. But he was faster. With a speed that caught me off guard, he grabbed my wrist and twisted it, sending a shock of pain up my arm. I gasped, trying to break free, but his grip was ironclad. You really think you can stop me? he spat, his eyes burning with malice. I struggled, my other hand reaching for anything I could use to defend myself. The phone. I could still call for help. I managed to grab it, dialing the number for Detective Harris as I wrestled with him. But then, just as quickly as it had started, he released me. I staggered back, confusion flooding my senses. "Get down," shouted Harris from the doorway, his gun drawn, his voice sharp. "Hands in the air, Richmond. You're under arrest." It was as if time slowed. Mr. Richmond, clearly taken by surprise, glanced at the police officers who were now pouring into the house. For a moment, I thought he might fight, but then his eyes darted to the stairs. He was calculating his next move, trying to find a way to escape. But he didn't get the chance. One of the officers moved swiftly, positioning himself between Mr. Richmond and the front door. Harris was already on the radio, calling for reinforcements. The situation was under control, but the tension didn't dissipate. My mind raced. How had we gotten to this point? How had it all come to this horrifying end? Before I could process what was happening, Mr. Richmond was being cuffed. He didn't resist. In fact, he almost seemed resigned to his fate. I felt a strange sense of disbelief wash over me. This was the man who had caused so much pain, who had killed Emily's father and orchestrated a plan to kill her too. And now it was all coming undone. "Regina, where is she?" I asked, my voice trembling as I glanced nervously around the room. Regina, the girl who had been caught in this web of lies and cruelty. She had been a pawn in her father's sick game, but I couldn't help but feel a sliver of sympathy for her. What kind of life had she led, knowing what her father had done? "She's in the car," one of the officers replied, his voice grim. "We've secured her for questioning." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. This wasn't over. Not yet. The next few hours were a blur of police reports, statements, and processing. The details of Regina's involvement were still unclear, but the pieces were slowly falling into place. Regina had been complicit in her father's plan, helping him arrange the gift for Emily, knowing it would kill her. The journal entry had been the key, the secret she had tried to hide, the knowledge that her father had poisoned Emily's father. And now she had been forced to participate in his death trap. Regina's confession came later, after hours of questioning. She was broken. Her involvement was clear. But there was a part of her that seemed almost relieved to finally speak the truth. She had been manipulated, forced into silence by her father's control, too afraid to turn against him. Emily and I sat in the waiting room as the investigation unfolded. The weight of everything that had happened was beginning to settle, but the horror of what we'd narrowly escaped still clung to me. The police had assured us that Regina's father would be facing charges for the murder of Emily's father and the attempted murder of Emily herself, but there was still so much to process. And then Emily spoke, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "Do you think she'll ever be free?" she asked, staring at her hands in her lap. "I mean, Regina." I looked at her, my heart aching for the girl who had lost so much, for the girl who had lost her father, and now had to carry the weight of his sins. "I don't know, honey," I said softly, "but sometimes the truth is the only way to set ourselves free." And as we sat there in silence, I realized that while we couldn't do the past, we could at least begin to heal. With Regina's father in custody and the truth finally out, there was hope for a future, one where Emily could breathe again, free from the shadows of a man who had tried to take everything from her. But the road ahead would be long, and there was still much to rebuild. And so we began, step by step, together. The following weeks were a blur. Life, in its cruel and beautiful way, marched on even as the foundations of everything we thought we knew were shattered. Emily and I stayed together, trying to piece ourselves back together. Each day felt like a small victory, but the scars were there, invisible yet deeply etched in the corners of our minds. The terror we'd faced, the manipulations we had unearthed, the ugly truths that had been hidden beneath layers of familial loyalty, those things weren't easy to forget. They weren't things you could just move past. Regina's trial was a media frenzy. Her father, Mr. Richmond, had been charged with multiple crimes: murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy. The evidence was undeniable. But Regina's involvement, though crucial, painted a complex picture. She had been an unwilling participant, fearful of her father's wrath, yet still complicit in his machinations. It seemed there was no easy explanation for how someone so young could become entangled in such darkness. Emily, despite everything, chose to speak out. It wasn't easy for her, not by any means, but there was something freeing about reclaiming her narrative, about telling the world the truth. It wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about her life, her future. "Mom," she had said one evening after her statement to the press had aired, "I'm not just a victim. I want to do something with all of this." Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and resolve. Emily had always been so strong, even when it didn't seem like it. She had the heart of a lion, a fire that burned brighter the more it was stoked by the winds of adversity. "I want to help others," she continued. "I want to make sure no one else has to live like we did, surrounded by lies and fear." And so, Emily began to find her footing again. She didn't have all the answers, and the journey ahead was going to be long, but she knew where she was headed. She wasn't going to let her father's death, her uncle's cruelty, and Regina's torment define her. She was going to use her voice to fight back against the darkness. Regina's trial had left us all uneasy, especially Emily. It was clear that the line between right and wrong wasn't always as easy to discern, and Regina's brokenness stirred something deep within Emily. Regina had been forced to play a part in a twisted game, but she wasn't the mastermind. That title belonged solely to her father, whose abuse of power had destroyed not just his brother, but his own daughter as well. Emily had a choice, a difficult choice. One evening, Emily sat by the window, staring out into the dark. I could see the weight of the world on her shoulders, and I knew what she was thinking. "I should visit her," Emily said softly. "Regina, I know she's the one who set everything in motion, but she's not all to blame. And I just don't want her to feel alone." I froze, my heart heavy with a mixture of concern and understanding. Emily had spent years fighting against Regina's father, the man who had killed her father, and now she was considering reaching out to the girl who had been indirectly responsible for all of it. "You don't have to do this, sweetheart," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You've already been through so much. If you want to help, that's your choice. But you don't owe her anything." Emily turned to me, her eyes brimming with a quiet strength. "No, Mom. I need to. For me. For both of us." And so, Emily wrote to Regina. The letter was simple, heartfelt, and offered nothing but kindness and a willingness to understand. It wasn't about forgiving what had happened. Nothing could ever erase that. But it was about offering a way forward, a glimmer of humanity in the midst of all the destruction. Regina's response came a week later. "I'm sorry," it began, the words clumsy but genuine. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was scared. My father made me do things, and I never knew how to stop it." The letter was filled with apologies, with raw, painful admissions of guilt, but it was also filled with a strange sense of liberation. Regina had been trapped in a prison of fear for so long, and now, with everything out in the open, she was forced to face the reality of her actions. But Emily didn't let her own anger cloud the opportunity for healing. Instead of recoiling, she wrote back, offering her forgiveness, not because Regina deserved it, but because Emily deserved to move on. She understood now that revenge and hatred would only continue the cycle of pain. What mattered now was finding peace for both of them. Emily's letter ended with an invitation. "If you ever need someone to talk to, you know where I am. You don't have to go through this alone." Advocacy programs for victims of domestic abuse and psychological manipulation. It wasn't easy, but it gave her purpose. The scars of the past would never fully fade, but Emily was learning to live with them, to carry them as part of her story without letting them define her. As for Regina, she eventually reached out. It wasn't often, but they would occasionally speak on the phone, tentatively at first, and then more freely. Emily never expected Regina to change overnight, but she knew that the girl was trying. That in itself was enough. Life, after all, was about healing, and healing wasn't linear. It was messy, unpredictable, and full of setbacks. But with each passing day, Emily moved forward, no longer a victim, but a survivor. And one day, as we sat together on the porch watching the sunset, I realized that the nightmare was over. For now. But the future, our future, was still unwritten. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, it would be a story worth living. The road to healing is never easy, nor is it ever a straight path. Emily's journey, though fraught with pain and betrayal, became a testament to resilience and the power of forgiveness. In facing the darkest parts of her past, she discovered that strength didn't lie in forgetting what had happened, but in learning to live with it and move forward. The bonds of family, once broken, had the potential to mend, but only through honesty, courage, and a willingness to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Though Regina's actions had been a catalyst for so much sorrow, the shared understanding between her and Emily became a powerful force for change. The scar of betrayal would always remain, but Emily's act of forgiveness allowed both women to begin the long process of healing. What was once a prison of fear had at last opened its doors, allowing them to step into the light of a new beginning. The future, uncertain as it is, holds hope. It holds the promise of peace, of rebuilding trust, and of creating a life that no longer revolves around the darkness of the past. For Emily and her family, that was the greatest gift of all, the chance to live, not in the shadow of betrayal, but in the light of a future they could finally control. If you found Emily's journey inspiring, remember that you too have the power to overcome the obstacles in your life. The road to healing can be tough, but with the right mindset, support, and forgiveness, it's possible to reclaim your future. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below, share your own experiences, or how you've learned to heal from difficult situations. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story or lesson. And remember, no matter how dark the past may seem, there's always light ahead. Keep moving forward, take action, and let your story be one of strength. Thanks for watching.